Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. So I wanted to make this video today, following up on the videos I'm making on the history of Islam, and just continue to zoom in and give other facts and other understandings about it, right? And so I want to make a distinction to begin with between mundane Muslim history and divine history. Right, so if we look at the age before Adam al-Islam, right? You have the age of the jinn, and then you have the age of ins before Adam al-Islam. And during both of those, you have revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala coming down. Likely. But from Adam al-Islam to Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you definitely have Nabuwat, you have Risalat, right? So this is what I call divine history, because there's, or biblical history you could say, but divine history because there's a direct intervention in history by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pretty regularly, pretty constantly, through the appointment of Anbiya and Rusul. But after Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after Khatma Risalat, the last 1400 years, which is nothing, human history, the history of ins, is about 1 million years. The history from Adam al-Islam is anywhere from 10 to 20,000 years. Is also not that much. So 1400 years after Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, historically speaking, is not a lot of time. It's a tiny amount of time. And so this 1400 years is what we can call mundane Muslim history, because it's after Khatma Risalat. There is no direct intervention in history, so it's a sort of mundane history. Now, of course, if we look at causation, the Amr is with Allah, so occasionalistically speaking, every moment is determined by the qadar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? So there is no real such thing as mundane history. But in a manner of speaking, since there is no prophecy, there are no mu'jizat, there is no anbiya or rusul, we can call this mundane Muslim history as opposed to divine history. Now, understanding the last 1400 years of Muslim history comprehensively, precisely, is extremely important. And there's two lenses by which you can understand history. This is Iqbalian, what I'm talking about. I'm a student of Iqbal, and Iqbal did this thing where instead of choosing between idealism and pragmatism, he would use them like two eyes. He would always have a dual analysis of everything, and that dual analysis would give him a balanced picture. And so if you look at history, there's two ways to analyze history. There's the pragmatic, biopragmatic, political analysis. You can look at, this king did this because he wanted this, or this person did this because he wanted that. You can do this like biopragmatic analysis, like people are acting in their own self-interest, And on the other side, you can look at the life of ideas, do an idealistic analysis, and you can do a Hegelian dialectical idealistic analysis, and you can see how different ideas are related to each other and how they necessitate each other, how they polarize against each other, how they produce the antithesis of each other, and then how they synthesize, right? So you can do this dual analysis of mundane Muslim history in order to have a three-dimensional holographic picture of the historical narrative like exactly what happened, you have to do both of these, you know. Now, because I have an idealistic tendency myself, and just because it's easier in some ways, I mean, the pragmatic analysis would be very detailed, you know. You would have to read a lot of history, do a lot of research. But if you want a summary, you want to understand like the kind of the essence of mundane Muslim history very easily, very directly, sort of in a summarizable fashion, but which is very meaningful. It gets you what we say lub labab in Urdu. I don't know if they say that in Arabic. Lub labab means like the crab meat, you know, the lobster meat of Muslim history, if you just want to get it, and the wisdom of it, like looking at it from the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, instead of like whatever sect you identify as, you know. Because just like there's three major political theories after Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, three major possible political theories or categories. There's the idealistic political theory after Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, there's the pragmatic, and there's the balanced or the just. One second, check this out. Balance and the just. There's also you know, three narratives that correspond to the people who chose each one of those political theories or the descendants of them, like the ideological descendants. So like if you chose the pragmatic political theory at the beginning of history, there's a tradition that forms around that. If you choose the idealistic one, there's a tradition that forms around that. And therefore, you interpret history with a particular lens that supports that original political theory that you chose, right? But what I'm saying is there's a way to look at history where you understand all the different sects and viewpoints, you integrate all of them, you acknowledge the truth that is in each one, and each one has a unique truth, you know, that is to be acknowledged and integrated, that has been lost by the other ones, which is what integral theory is. So let me say a word on integral theory before moving forward. Integral theory is this idea by Ken Wilber, which in many ways is an application of Wahdatul Wujud. And integral theory says that all truths, all perspectives are true but partial. Right? All perspectives are true but partial. What that means is every viewpoint in its essential basic nature is true, but it is limited, meaning there's more truth outside of it. And that the proper way of relating to different perspectives isn't necessarily to negate them or argue them from your own perspective, but rather to develop an integrated perspective is to acknowledge the truth in every perspective that you encounter, first and foremost. And so this wisdom, like if we say establishing a common word with people, it's the same type of wisdom, but it's said in a philosophical language. And so if we look at the various perspectives that have existed, like the ideological spectrum or the theological spectrum that has existed in the Ummah, that the farqa that happened at the beginning has baqa, right? Like, so in Christianity, like the sectarianism started 400 or 500 years after Christ, but in Islam the sectarianism began at the very beginning. But those sects that came about in the first century have lasted. They have baqa, right? They have persistence. They have lasted. So the question is, why did the sectarianism begin immediately at the beginning? Why did Allah permit the permit the sectarianism or the differentiation or the breaking, you can say, let's say disintegration of the Ummah? And why did he give the disintegrated perspectives persistence for 1400 years? Some minor ones might have been erased or gone with, but for the most part, all the Ishmaelis, the Zaydiyah, the Muhakkima, the Sunnis, everyone has been around since the beginning, And so the question is, why is there differentiation or tafarqa to begin with? And why has it been given baqa for so long? Why is it persisting for so long? Why is Allah giving it persistence or baqa for so long? Right? And the answer is that each one of them in their core is preserving a truth that is essential to Islam and has been lost by the other sects. Each one has. But in the face of the other sects, in order to preserve it in a contrarian manner, they have to overemphasize it. And when they overemphasize whatever essential truth that they have that has been lost by the rest, they necessarily, when they overstate that essential truth that they have, they end up understating things that everybody else has, And so the ideological system they create, at its core, is preserving the essential thing that they have. But in so doing, in the face of the rest of the sects, it is kind of perverting, it's understating other things, right? So there's this kind of a distorted view. Each sect has a sort of distorted view, but each distortion is important because it's preserving something unique that has been lost by the others, the distortion of the other sects. They're not wrong. It's not false exactly. It's like one angle of viewing, and you need all the angles of viewing to get the real picture. So here, we can talk a little bit about the spectrum, right? So there's a spectrum I describe, the ideological spectrum from left to right in Islam. And this is the polarity of kitab and hikmat, or hikmat and kitab, actually, when you go left, the way I do it. Or from in Nasara to Yahud, right? It's the same polarity. Kitab and hikmah polarity exists within the ummah, within the ideological spectrum of the ummah. And this spectrum, when you study it, if you study it properly, you understand the spectrum. You understand, the theological, it has to do with theology, Quranology, even prophetology. I don't know what the correct English word is for that, but the opposite sides of the ummah always have complementary perspectives, which each by themselves is actually extreme, but is balanced by the opposite. So for example, if you look at what's called the Batanis and the Zahiris, so Ishmaelis, another name for them is Batanis, right? And another name for the extreme Salafis is Zahiris, And if you look at the theology and the chronology of both of them, they perfectly complement one another. And if you take either one of them to be true, it's clearly a perversion of what is true. So for example, give me a second. One second. So for example, theologically speaking, right? If you look at the Batanis, they say if you look at the Batanis, one thing they say theologically is, one second, let me sit down. If you look at the Batanis, one thing they say theologically is that you can't say anything about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Like there's nothing that can be said. They're extremely apophatic. And what that means is like, if you've ever heard of like the Ismailis exaggerating the status of their imams and therefore being mushriks, really you don't understand their theology, because what they say is no matter what they say about their imams, like nothing you can say is about Allah. So the fact that they're saying something about their imams immediately puts them in the category of like not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now they have other problems, and you know there might be mystery elements to their school and stuff like that, but if you understand them theologically, the fact, no matter what they're saying about their imams, they're apophatic, you know. And so they're saying you can't, it doesn't mean like what is really Allah or what is really about Allah cannot be articulated in language, in the human language. And so whatever they're saying cannot be said about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You know what I'm saying? They have this viewpoint, and from that viewpoint they say things about their imams. So in a way they have extreme atiyat, which they pre-confess before they say what they say. And then if you look at the opposite side theologically, you look at like the Zahiri school, right? And the Zahiri school will say things like Allah has a body, and that body is somewhere in space, and when we point upwards we're actually pointing toward him, and he has an actual physical arsh. So they take everything very literally, and they place Allah within zaman and maqam, kind of like the Mormons do even, right? Like they place Allah within zaman and maqam, and they even assign physicality to Allah in hands and feet, like physically, you know. And then if you look at the chronology of the same two schools, like the Batanis or the Ismaili will say that you know, the Ismailis will say like the Quran is created, you know, like the Quran is created, and then actually I think the Zahiris will say no, it's not created, it's qadim, you know, it's eternal. And so like obviously the Mus'haf is created, and even the language, like past the Mus'haf, like the Arabic, obviously, like in which it's articulated, it can be said to be a creation, like the exact pattern of phonemes that the Quran is, you know, on the first heaven level, can be said to be created even. But ultimately, you know, what it gives access to, the metaphysical Quran, is not created, obviously, you know. And so like even the Quranology is very complementary, not just the theology. And so understanding the spectrum and trying to integrate the spectrum, you know, what I call through the ecumenical reconciliation of Muslim ideologies, due to a cognitive and philosophical maturity, to an integral level of development, I think is extremely important in our times. Yeah. So one of the reasons that this work is important, like if you look at like the Huntingtonian civilizations, right? You look at like whatever the major dominant ones are right now, like the Anglo-Saxon or the Protestant civilization. You look at the UK and America and Australia, and they're like unified, you know. Jason Reza Georgiani talks about this, that post World War II, the English establishment or the American establishment absorbed a lot of the Nazi establishment. They absorbed them and took on a lot of the resources, and there was actually a sort of unification between the two establishments that occurred. And so there's a deep, like the CIA and the banking system actually represents like a sort of virtual crypto oligarchy or a crypto king, which unifies, which kind of rules over all three of them. So there's a centralized like unity between Protestant civilization. And you look at China, they are actually Chinese civilization is actually unified into a single state. And you look at like these dominant, like Orthodox civilization is attempting, like Ukraine is an attempt at broader unity within their civilization. So you see like this unification within civilizations, like they're very strongly unified. And I think one of the problems we have within the Muslim civilization is because we have no clear central state. We have like two central states, like Iran is the Shia central state, and maybe Saudi is the like Muslim central, the Sunni central state. We need a broader unity. We need intra-civilizational unity, and for that we need like ideological and philosophical foundations. And these are the ideological and philosophical foundations. I call it al-ittihadul ummah ala asul qawi, right? These are like the sound principles upon which ittihad can be had, without immediately erasing like the real differences, but giving a broader framework that allows for like a deeper unity and then a gradual unification, right? Like a gradual, more superficial unification, while allowing like a broader unity. Anyways, I'm gonna end this video there. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.